Okay, hi friends, Angie, Para Disney. So this is part 2 of clips from the 2020 Sean Maguire interviews on, it's a podcast, 2-hour podcast. So I'm doing clips to separate the subjects we covered. This next clip is probably the longest of the 2-hour podcast, and it's more of my survivor story. For those that have heard bits and pieces, you'll forgive me, but it's just like, it's only by speaking out loud and trying to get the sequence of events and the context that you peel back the onion, because we were never, as an MKUltra survivor, a survivor of trauma-based mind control experiments and, abuse, and drugging and electroshock and all sorts of nefarious experiments. We were never meant to remember. So forgive me. Somebody pulled me up recently from this interview, actually, that I said my mother was evacuated in World War One. Well, in a few seconds later, I talked about during the Blitz. Well, clearly that was World War Two. But it's just about trying to swim upstream and recall what we were hypnotized and tortured never to remember, and if we remembered, never to put in sequence and never to prove. So there are enough of us speaking out. So I've released a few videos under the hashtag Survivor Stories, remembering Isaac Cappy. So I'll find somewhere to put that, link that in here. So here we go. Back to the Sean Maguire. Is it here? Yeah, here it is. We'll just pick up where we left off.
Oh, no, that was my fault as well. Look, Angela, welcome to the show. Welcome back to Out of the Bag. It's great to have you on. I really want people who haven't heard your previous interviews to maybe go back, check www.outofthebagradio.weebly.com, put Angela Power Disney in the Google search on the homepage, and you'll find all your blogs and podcasts from when you previously were on the show. And you were wonderful. But guess what? Sorry about this, but I do want you to repeat some of that stuff as well.
Okay.
One of the most important things is to introduce you. You tell us, Angela, your bit of history, and really very interested in your parents' history as well.
Okay, well, as some of I know you've got an international audience, but for your Irish audience, you'll have spotted I have a kind of English accent. And I describe myself in my little Twitter thing as I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm a survivor of trauma-based mind control, MKUltra, and military paedophile ring.
Yeah, that's a wow, isn't it, really? You know, that's a feckin' wow.
It is, and it's a part of me that I have blogged about and vlogged about for years, but most people know me for my anti-child abuse campaigning or for my work exposing satanic ritual abuse and, advocating for others. And I kind of, I stay quiet sometimes. The reason why I do that is because I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
Got the t-shirt.
But this is the platform now to actually go there, Angela.
Okay. So it doesn't make sense without my parents' a little bit of stuff from there, because my father was the eldest son of, well, he's still alive, he's 97 in July. My father is the eldest son of 16 children from a family in Dungarvan in County Waterford, Power. And he ran away at 19. Well, no, I'm going to go even further than that, because the thing that I want people to understand is that a lot of these paedophile rings and very sort of heavy abuse is a generational thing. So I've got to start with his father.
Sure, yeah.
His father was Tom Power from Waterford. father of these 16 children. He was the railwayman in Dungarvan, County Waterford. And sadly, he was a sadist and an abuser, paedophile. He abused my mother, and then he went on to abuse or rape myself and at least 2 of my sisters, and molest several of my cousins. But he wasn't just a simple paedophile. He had some knowledge of what I've since discovered to be sort of ritual torture. For instance, he kept a coffin in the cottage, and when we would come home like yourself every summer to visit Granny and Grandad from England or wherever we were living in the world, and I can remember asking, why is there a coffin in the living room? And there was some story about, oh, it's an old bachelor, he's terrified of a neighbour, terrified of getting a pauper's death, so Grandad minds it for him. Okay. But years later, I find out from my aunties that they were locked in that coffin, you know, and that's for anybody that researches trauma-based mind control, MKUltra and programming rituals. That's a common ritual, is to be locked in a coffin. The other thing they would do is, the cottage was opposite the Strand wall, which would be about 20-foot drop because the water comes up and down in Dungarvan, you know. Mm-hmm. And one of my aunties would be dangled over there by her feet as a young child to be terrorised. And then my granddad would do things like, there was only 11 children survived out of the 16 past toddlerhood. And really that's worthy of, you know, that's worthy of looking at. I just thought, oh, well, 5 infant deaths. Maybe that was just the times that were in it. But actually, you know, if they weren't all dead and gone, there's only 2 or 3 of them still alive, that would be something that's questionable. But the other kinds of things he would do that were sadistic, he would line up the 11 children and he would make them, the oldest one, grab hold of the electric fence, and then he'd watch the shock go through the 11 children and just fall around the place laughing.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, and if you came home from England, he'd love to see his billy goats chase you and just, you know, on their own, you could say, oh, well, would you get over yourself? He's just, you know, he's just a kind of weird sense of humor. But given everything I know and the dark side of him abusing and molesting, it was, to me, it was, those kind of things were ritualistic.
Yeah, well, the death of the children, I mean, that's certainly needs investigation. But
yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, it's just that I come from quite a large, well, not, I'm only one of 3 boys, but my mother was sterilized quite early on, so that was why we only had 3 boys. But you know, my grandfather on my mother's side, you know, he's one of 13. They were all healthy, I think. They you know, there weren't any disappearances or deaths that I knew of anyway.
Yeah, it's amazing because even I'm 62 and I'm still getting pennies dropped with me where family legends that I accepted as normal, and then it'll go, oh, that's not normal, you know, that's not normal. But anyway, so my father was fairly, you know, I don't know, I can't speak for him, but I know he was sexually abused. Well, he was horrendously physically and emotionally abused at the Christian Brothers school. He hated school and he was humiliated and battered and name called, and he came out of the Christian Brothers school and traumatized, and he just left school at 13. Yeah. And he got a job in the local Master of the Hunt stables near Dungarvan, outside of Dungarvan, and he was sexually abused by somebody that lived in and worked there. He started to be sexually abused at the stables, and I don't know how long that went on. Gusty, somebody or other sexually abused him for, and my dad's explanation when I asked him about that years ago, Gusty Dalton or something like that, my mother told me about it, and I asked my dad, and he says, oh, sure, that, you know, that was very common in Ireland back in those days. Nobody ever passed any remark about it. So you buy into these myths that your family is normal, you know. So he was working in the hunt. He loved horses and dogs, and he's gifted with them. And he was getting sexually abused. I don't think he told anybody. And so at 19, he ran away to Belfast, and he betrayed the family, especially the Maher side of the family from the Glenavahalo, real Republicans. He betrayed the family in as much as he ran away to Belfast and he joined the British Air Force.
Okay, right. Okay, that was a statement.
Now he kept that secret for decades. We were never allowed to say that Daddy was in the, you know, British Royal Air Force, and he never would get photographs taken in uniform and so on. But then he went on to meet and marry my mother. She was English Protestant, and unbeknownst to her, he'd already been engaged to 2 other women before her, but he didn't tell her that. And I suspect from research I've done since that he was exactly the kind of person targeted for MKUltra programs being operated after World War II in the military, both the British military and the American military and intelligence services, you know, Project Paperclip and so on. So they knew that if they had already alienated subjects joining the British military, as in different nationalities, and sadly coming from Ireland, they would be known to probably already be traumatized by violence or abuse.
By their upbringing,
So I think my father was recruited pretty early on to volunteer, not so much himself, although he does display signs of dissociation, but certainly when he married my mum and then started to have children, I think he signed us up and my mum up for no consent medical experiments. So,
wow. Do you think your mother knew about this, or was
I think
part of it?
Probably the answer is yes to both. Like I said, she was an English Protestant, and she was all lined up to marry some vicar or banker's son or a solicitor. Do you know what I mean? She was very sort of middle class and came from a very anti-Catholic, anti-Irish family. But my father kind of decided she was to be his wife, and that was that. And so she converted to Catholicism, and she got, what is it, when your family cuts you off? She got cut off by her family for marrying my dad, and she threw her lot in with him. But so I'm pretty sure along the way she has realized that she herself was victimized and us children were being, you know, brutalized and victimized.
So let's go back a little bit. And when your mother and father got together, how long was it before children came along? And obviously then they were affected by the programming that your father was going through.
She was 19 when she married him, and he was 27. And she gave birth to the first child at 21.
Okay.
And then she had 8 pregnancies in 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then she lost 3. Again, there's this thing of, but she, years later, well, actually, when I was only about maybe 9, I suppose, or maybe about 8 or 9, I overheard her talking with another RAF wife about that she couldn't cope with a pregnancy every year, and her husband, being a Catholic, wouldn't let her use contraception, and he wouldn't help with the children, and so on and so forth. So basically they were discussing how they would do self-abortions.
Oh, wow. And also there's that Freemason thing about, you know, killing of firstborns being a sacrificial entrance.
Yeah. Well, she used to say that out of the 8 pregnancies she had, 3 of them, quote unquote, miscarriages. I would say, wow, you've shocked me there, because you might be right. But yeah, 3 ended in quote unquote miscarriage, and the thing she says is, oh, they were boys, I wasn't able to carry boys.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, now whether there's any truth in that, I don't know, but my mum was also a ready trauma victim. She'd been evacuated age 5 in World War One.
Okay.
And she'd been sent down to far distant cousins in Taunton, Somerset, and places, and pretty traumatized. She wasn't abused there, but just the sheer trauma of being evacuated in the Blitz. And then, but I think she was already marked as well herself as a possible subject for MKUltra programs, because out of nowhere, she was, even before she ever met my father, she was offered a scholarship at 14 to a Catholic school in Essex.
Mm.
So these scholarships were used an awful lot to get subjects where they wanted them.
Right, I had a scholarship myself. Mm.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So she was already being educated by nuns. Now, I know the nuns that I was educated by were certainly complicit with military programs and programming.
And how do you know that, Angela?
Because, well, first of all, my auntie, she's deceased now, but my auntie was a nun. And she was in she was a mother superior and a mother provincial, and she was very, she climbed the ranks. She was all over the world. And when I used to be traumatized to the point of being mute, but not able to speak or not able to walk from violence or just utterly broken down, she would always take me in with no questions asked, wherever she was as a nun.
Right.
If it was a nunnery, then I would just be given a room like the nuns had. Or if she was running a monastery or like a home for retired monks or something, she'd just put me in a bed and breakfast. She wouldn't ask, why are you black and blue? She wouldn't ask, why can't you talk? What's happened to you? Nothing. Yeah, she would just feed me, give me books about saints, and yeah.
So with your father's and mother's history, I mean, obviously he was in the British Air Force, so he would have travelled all over the world. Therefore, you would have travelled all over the world.
Yeah, I've lived in 49 homes on 7 countries on 3 continents.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, which I think is again a marker for alienation, because the more you've been subjected to trauma, and preferably generational trauma with rituals, the more easy you are to fracture, to hypnotize, if you want to use it in simple words.
Well, I actually think the whole of the mass population is being hypnotized on a daily level. So
absolutely, yeah. But we were the experimental. They started with the micro, and now they've gone macro.
Right. Okay, makes sense. That makes sense.
So after World War II, with the likes of Joseph Mengele and all the Nazi scientists and all the rest of it, they were experimenting on twins and on the mind. And after World War I, they wanted to find a cure for what it was called shell shock back then. It's called PTSD now.
Yeah.
Because it was bad for business in terms of recruitment. If the soldiers kept coming back utterly traumatized and broken.
Mm-hmm.
And they also wanted to do experiments about hypothermia. At what point would the human body just die?
Mm.
And they wanted to do experiments. They wanted to create the perfect spy that wouldn't disclose under torture. So,
okay.
So they were competing allegedly with the Russians to be the first to conquer the human mind as a I don't know, an experiment, a weapon, and also the mother and child bond. They would. I don't know if you saw the documentary Three Identical Strangers. Did you see that documentary?
I haven't, to be honest. No.
Well, it was fantastic, and it was about three triplets being adopted out separately from a Jewish orphanage in New York, and then they were observed for 20 years to see if they would ever realise they were triplets, or if they would ever miss their siblings, or one of them was put with a wealthy family, one with a middle-class family, and one with a working-class family, and then they were observed like guinea pigs.
Wow.
And they found each other accidentally, you know, and one of them ended up committing suicide. This had been a whole project going on in New York. They'd gone out and they'd got loads of twins and triplets and then adopted them out separated to do a project, just to do research. And,
it's like the Truman Show on steroids, isn't it?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Truman Show, but it is mad scientists. And the one that did that project out of New York, his assistant, that mad psychiatrist, I can't remember his name, but his assistant was tracked down for the documentary. And she said, oh, Dr. So-and-so's research will be world renowned as soon as his subjects die off. He won't be fully recognized for the marvelous work, marvelous research he did into sibling attachment or something. And similarly, I believe my sister was part of a project in a military hospital in Germany where she and I were both born. And when she was born, my mother, they took her away, and then they brought a baby back half an hour later, and my mother said that they brought her back a different baby. And they tried to tell my mother that wasn't true, and she was just overwrought, and you know, it was
I
just. I
think her mother would know, wouldn't it?
She absolutely knew, yeah. And then, but my father shamed her never to get blood tests done or anything. And then my sister, like myself, was monitored with you know, like, they would call it surveys and stuff of us, you know, but the nuns used to cooperate with the monitoring and the allocating of us to different projects. But I infiltrated a group of other people born in the same time period in that military hospital. And I came across other people that had been in the same program where they'd had, what it was the father was recruited to make his wife and other pregnant at the same time.
Wow.
And then there would be affected a swap at birth, a swap, so that both babies would belong to the father, but it would be the mothers would have their babies swapped on them.
That's just sick, isn't it? It's incredible.
It's diabolical. And then they would observe to see if the mother-child bond was really nature or was it just nurture. And when I kind of stumbled upon this was even before I'd seen the Three Identical Strangers documentary. I spoke to my mother and my sister about it, and they knew, because we share the same history of dissociation and trauma and abuse, and you know, they knew that I wasn't talking out the back of my head, so they both agreed to do a DNA test. But sadly, I think my sister told my father, and 10 days later she was dead.
Whoa, hang on a second. You'll have to repeat that, because so your sister was murdered?
I think so, yeah. When my father is a psychopath. I still am a bit trauma bonded to him, and I still get nervous talking like this.
Okay. Well, you don't have to, of course.
No, it's okay. I know you're not pressuring me to, but it's like it's the same way that Joseph Mengele, when he would do experiments on his subjects in World War II and afterwards, but the trauma bonding makes you love your abuser.
Right.
So they would call him our beloved Mengele.
Right, so that's more than Stockholm Syndrome.
It's trauma bonding, they call it trauma bonding. And so, of course, the ideal person to be trauma bonded to is your own parents.
Of course.
And this is why it's so powerful. This is why they're able to do this there are 5 generations of abuse that I know of in my family, you know, on both sides, either abusers or abused victims.
Yeah.
And
so, how far back do you remember your own abuse, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, do you remember being 2-3-year-old and having these things happen to you?
It might. I'll tell you. I'll start with the strangest thing.
Sure.
Laugh at it. Over the years, I've looked for answers everywhere, and I've been in the New Age, and I was a psychic, and I used to do tarot and runestones, and you know, whatever. I was always looking for answers, and at one point, I was fascinated with what do they call it? There's a name for it, I can't remember, but anyway, what it was I had a memory. It seemed like to me. Of being born, of coming down the birth canal in an absolute panic. Now, it seems insanity to say that you can have a memory at that stage, but actually they proved that even in utero, the baby's memory starts to work from about 30 weeks.
Well, there are people that, you know, they stress that they remember past lives and being reborn, etc. So, you know.
Yeah, well, so rebirth, there was some name for it in the 70s, and anyway, but whatever it was, you can kind of stumble on these sort of things with meditation, or I don't know, a good smoke or whatever, but whatever it was, I thought I had a memory of a very panicked birth, and I asked my mother. I thought, now this is crazy. I'm getting into all this American shite. Don't be stupid. But I just ran it past my mother, who's also still alive, and she's 86. And I said, Mom, silly question, but was there any kind of rush to my... I had scientific reason to ask as well, because I have bilateral optic nerve atrophy, and that can be caused by oxygen starvation during the birth process.
Okay.
It can also be hereditary or a bit of both, but that was a medical reason I wanted to know. And then I got fascinated on the sidetrack with this, am I having a memory, or is this just crazy New Age stuff? But anyway, I ran it past her. I said, Mum, you know, was there any sort of panic to my birth? And she went into howls of laughter and said, oh yes, you were the 3rd baby and Daddy was mad for a boy, and I hadn't managed to produce a boy, and I went into labour at the hairdresser's, and I didn't want to go, my waters broke, but I wanted to get my hair finished because I wanted to look nice for Daddy. I thought you were going to be a boy, and blah, blah, blah. And she talks about, you know, staying at the hairdresser's till her hair was, you know, with shampoo and rollers and sitting under a dryer, the whole lot. And then she says she got to the hospital and it was a very panicked, rushed affair. Right. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But when somebody asks me, what's your earliest memory?
Well, it correlated with that, yes. Okay.
Yeah, and that may or may not be true, but I have multiple flashback memories of the first 8 years.
Well, I was really talking about, you know, like the birth is the birth, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm a cesarean section, so that's trauma. And many people are these days because they book them in and book them out and all the rest of it. But really what I was asking was, you know, the first memory of abuse. I don't, you know. Oh,
okay. Yeah, well, okay. So my mother tells me, I can't put them in chronological order, because the thing I didn't realise was that there was drugging involved right from, I would say we were part of a project even at conception. I would say my mother was already signed up, and any offspring was signed up. So my sister and I were both born in this Freemasonic ley line hospital built in 111 days. And it was it was for Army, Air Force, American and European, and secular. So it was there's a word, what catchment? It was a catchment hospital, and it was, I believe it was, there were post-World War II experiments going on there. It was deliberately set up.
So it's a military hospital, so Angela.
Well, it was a military hospital, but it was also open to others. But there was a very high infant mortality rate. And there were, as I discovered, other projects going on with, you know, swapping of babies at birth, and but the way my mother described it was that my mother said you were in hospital most of the first 5 years of your life. You were in hospital more than you were out, more than you were home. You were a sickly child. And so again, I kind of accepted that, and I had memories. I had strange memories of being immobilized. So I had memories of not being able to move from the neck down, but of being happy, like artificially happy. So I imagine I was being drugged and experimented on along the line, not with psychic driving, but different experiments, sensory deprivation. You can actually locate many of these programs and identify them, although the most common known is that MKUltra, it was identified and found, and the projects found in America, but it went under the radar that much of it was also emanating from Britain and going on in Europe, you know. But you can find a lot of these things. So I have memories of being immobilized from the neck down and being very artificially happy. And it's weird to say that I know it's artificially happy, but it was like an induced, like you can't move, but you've got this gaiety thing going on. Right. This sort of, and then I have memories of, you know, just doctors and being just absent, just being in a hospital bed, or I have memories of dental chairs and being drugged but not having any dental work done. Wow. I have memories of being trafficked by my father.
How were you trafficked? I mean, do you remember going to other people's families and things?
Yeah. And I at one point thought it was just coincidental that the places I'd be sent to or dropped to would have paedophiles in them. I didn't think there was a hidden hand facilitating that. But for instance, you know, we'd be farmed out to stay with different people, and then I'd get molested, and I didn't know I'd get drugged as well. I only put those pieces together much later. But I also remember very clearly my father dropping my sister and I. We were stationed in Gibraltar, and we'd have been about 6 and 7, and he dropped us to this, what you'd call a shebeen, a very sort of dark and dirty bar, a very sort of secretive, yucky bar, and he left us there. And then the men in there were being lovely to us, and we were dressed in our little pretty dresses and what have you. And then they gave us a Coke and a Fanta, which would be a rare treat for us. And then we sensed, my sister was 11 months older than me, and we sensed something wasn't right. And she said, should we make a run for it? And we didn't finish our drinks. I think if we'd finished our drinks, we would have passed out as predicted and been abused and then been collected later. And we drank some of our drink, and then we just sensed extreme danger, and we ran. And I remember the man chasing after us, screaming at us, come back and drink your drink, come back and drink your drink. And you know, at age 12, I was put on a boat at Harwich to the Hook of Holland on my own. Okay. And sent for a month to somebody that was a paedophile that abused me every day.
So met the other side in Holland by this paedophile? But
I wasn't even met the other. I was put on the boat at 12 with written instructions, and you know, I had a cabin booked and £20 spending money for a month's stay in Germany. And I didn't stay in the cabin. I played the slot machines all night with lorry drivers all around me. Thank God nobody spotted that I was on my own, age 12, you know, playing the machines all night. And then I get to the Hook of Holland, and I had instructions to get a train to Aachen, and then change trains in Aachen and get a train to Dusseldorf. And then I was met by somebody connected to the same military hospital where I was born, who was a paedophile. And so, you know, left there for a month and sent there again 2 more summers. And I didn't start asking the right questions until I just kept thinking, why do I keep getting abused? And then I'd have memories, but I didn't know about drugging. So I had another horrific memory from Wiltshire in England. I think it was Wiltshire. It was either RAF Halton or RAF Rudlow Manor. And I had a memory of being hunted in a forest and running for my life and feeling like my heart was going to come out of my chest. I was so running for my life, literally. And then I have a very vivid memory of tripping over on a fallen tree, and then there's a blank, and the next memory I have is, because when I tripped over and fell, I fell face down in the forest. But when I came around, I was on my back with a circle of men around me, urinating on me.
Wow.
But because I couldn't remember the middle bit, I just wouldn't believe that memory for decades. I just thought, that can't be. And I had a flashback in 2016 and actually recognized one of the circle of men around me. And I'm going to say this, and this is just me saying this, I can't prove this, but because we were raised my father was 25 years in the military, and the first 12 years of my life I spent as an Air Force kid. And we used to do this song on the bus, Army's balmy, Navy's crazy, up with the RAF. And in the circle, there was somebody in an army uniform. And I, even in my devastation, having been drugged and abused and hunted, but even in that state, I remember thinking, why is there an army man there? Why is there an army man? And decades later, I saw a photograph of Lord Bramall online, and it was the same person. It was the same person.
Wow.
And you know,
I've heard of these hunts, Angela. You know, I've heard of them taking place, and when I first started hearing them was about a decade ago, and I was thinking, no, this can't be real.
Crazy! You just think you're crazy. It can't be true. So I had lots of fragmented memories like that, but I didn't want to believe them, and then I didn't ask the right questions. Like it took me years.
You were a child, Angela.
Yeah,
you were an abused child, so you know, it's awful that you were even put in that position. But to be able to ask the right questions, I mean, how would you know to ask?
But even as a researcher in adulthood, like I'm still like, you know, for you to highlight the fact that it's not normal for 5 of my dad's siblings to have died in infancy. You know, I still got pennies dropping. I've still got like, because like I remember for years I accepted my mother's thing. It's like, oh yes, Angela was in hospital the first 5 years. And then I said to her, Mum, why was I in hospital so much? And she said, you always got bronchitis when you were teething. Wow. And then I thought, and I didn't even have the courage to say to her, you don't teeth till you're 5. Do you know what I mean? What a late, and I tried another time to say to her, like, Mum, I won't be mad at you, but did you put me in hospital? Because Dad, my father was working in the hospitals. He was the chef running the kitchens.
Okay.
And so I said, Mum, I won't be angry, but did you like just keep putting me in hospital because you couldn't cope with 5 little ones? And she got very angry with me. She didn't want to. It's a very dark period in my life. Very dark period. I don't want to talk about this. I'm not comfortable talking about this, you know. And so it's just been a journey of, you know, like the fascinating thing was myself and Kathy Morgan, we actually located a funded project of putting English and Irish together to marry. I think I mentioned this in a previous show to you, but there was hundreds of thousands put up to have Irishmen go to England of marriageable age and have English girls come to Ireland of marriageable age. They deliberately did a eugenics experiment.
So that's a watering down of genetic.
That's what they said, that the Irish as a race were unmanageable. They were too rebellious.
It's why we're so fluoridated. It's a crime, everyone.
You wouldn't believe it now with the freaking compliance corona, but they said that these eugenicists said that the two races, well, I think they called them the Negroes and the Celts, were both unmanageable races, and that one experiment worth having was to dilute their blood.
And they've been doing that, and they've been doing that with the Negro races as well. So, you know, all over the world.
To make us more manageable. And it also creates alienation because, you know, even as an Anglo-Irish person, I've suffered, you know, not hugely, but I've suffered identity issues about, you know, I'm not Irish to the Irish, I'm not English to the English, I'm not Hampstead, I don't fit in, do you know what I mean? It's like...
Well, listen, that's the only thing I can relate to you, because I don't remember abuse when I do, physical, but but, you know, I'm in the same situation, really. I was born in Cheltenham in England, Irish parents, both Irish parents, so I was a paddy in England. And I come over to Ireland and I was a Brit bastard. You know, so you get that now. It's horrible, isn't it?
It is, and it is. You do get it. You know, fuck off with your British accent, or you know, like who are you? You know, it just furthers alienation, which I suppose takes away tribal pride and patriotism and a sense of who you are. I think the thing we said about the experiments they did on my generation in the micro, they're now doing on the macro.
Yes, definitely.
So they're now discouraging people from identifying as Irish or English or American.
Or
now
male or female.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So all the experiments that were done in the 20th century and really galloped post-World War II, now they're being rolled out as a global, you know, I don't even like using the word global, but as a worldwide thing, because they perfected the research on you know, thousands of military children, children from children's homes, prisoners, even people in the military. Like my mother was given electroshock treatment 3 to 5 times a week.
Wow.
For 9 weeks at a time. You know, they were trying to discover the perfect memory wiping. The story they told her was it was to treat her depression. So they would identify the periods in her life where she'd had trauma, and they would electroshock specifically to wipe her memories from that trauma. But it was barbaric. Yeah. It was barbaric. It was, you know, almost lobotomized. Now, she did recover, but it took years, and I don't know if she ever fully recovered. She's dissociative. I'm diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. All my sisters are the 3 that are surviving. My nieces, you know, my dad.
I have to say, Angela, you really do come across as someone who's very, very together. A lot more than some people that haven't been through any traumas in their lives, you know. So you're doing incredibly well.
Thanks. Part of, I will try and receive that actually, because I was determined in talking to you today not to come on as the gung-ho, scared of nobody, fight the world, save the world campaigner. I wanted to be vulnerable to say, this is why I fight. I just wanted to add for some reason that you know, my father was very brutal, and the sadistic things carried on from his father, where you know, he was very cruel to animals around us, and he fractured my older sister's skull when she was 8. And she was taken to the hospital. This is why I say my mother was complicit, really, to some extent. She was victimized, certainly, but she knew we were getting abused. She knew the guy in Germany that I got sent to 3 times for a month. Yeah. She knew, absolutely knew. He had been prosecuted for exposing himself in the children's playground in the past. She had been told by, I only found out later, my older sister had told her 2 years previous that he had orally raped her while we were staying there. So, but my mother still sent me, age 12, there, and she knows things like my dad fractured my big sister's skull at age 8. We got beatings that we couldn't, we couldn't walk, and we were black and blue, and we had to be kept off school. And she, unless she was absolutely, I know I can't make any excuses. On some level, she knew, even though she would get carted off and electroshocked herself.
Yeah.
And she was getting brutalized in the marriage, but on some level she knew, and I do think she is criminally guilty of failure to protect her children.
Absolutely. And yes, she was a victim, but so was your dad a victim.
He's held me down in the past, and she's poured crushed Valium down my throat.
Whoa.
To stop me. When my programming started to break down and I would fight against whatever was happening, he's held me down while she's drugged me. So, again, the trauma bonding is there. I want to see that she's a victim too, and I do forgive them both. My mother more so, but I haven't spoken to my father for 5 years because I believe he poisoned my sister to death.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to say, is that all that abuse and everything. How old was your sister when she was, let's say, stated when she was murdered?
58. It was recent. You see, I was starting to get healed from about the last 20 years. I went for counselling with Rian, which is like, national counselling service that was set up by Bertie Ahern after the Catholic Church scandal.
Okay.
And they took 8% of non-institutional abuse survivors, and I managed to get qualified through that. And so I had counselling there, and I was starting to get help and starting to, disclose. I mean, my mum, I was worried about my mum. I was minding her. I was caring for her and my father. And she kept telling me, I'm afraid for my life. And he kept threatening her life. He had canisters of petrol in the garage, and he kept threatening to set fire to the house with the two of them in it.
Wow.
And they'd been in separate bedrooms for about 25 years, and she would wake up with him staring at her, and she had a sense of being drugged, and but we couldn't put it into words back then, and it was very easily masked because she would take a few drinks, and so if ever she was unconscious, he just would say, "Oh, she's drunk."
Yeah, right.
As I started caring for both of them, she said to me, "Angela, I promise you, I only had 2 glasses of wine, but I don't remember what happened. And all I know is I would go to bed not knowing if I would wake up the next day. And I would take her to St. James's for blood tests and for leukemia. And she had this toxicity in her liver. It should have been between 40 and 70, and it was showing up at 350, 370, like deadly levels."
Wow.
And they thought it was alcohol, but so my mum's saying I'm not drinking the level of alcohol to explain being unconscious or falling over or not remembering things, and Daddy's threatening to burn the house down, and if I get in the car with him, he threatens to drive us both in the back of the lorry, and so I ended up getting her away.
Okay.
Her social work teams and her medical teams said that her life was in danger. He was threatening to shoot her with his shotgun, and I took her to the guards to make a statement about it. So it was escalating, and I got her away, and within a matter of weeks, the next blood test at St. James's her liver toxicity had dropped from 350 to 70.
Oh, right, okay.
And she was drinking the exact same amount as she consciously thought she was drinking at home.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't alcohol, right? But then when my sister died, she had a toxin in her liver of over 500 and 0 alcohol and a blow to her left temple. She had a hematoma, which indicated a blow to the left temple, and 0 alcohol and a mystery toxin of over 500. And the coroner said it was an alcohol-related death.
Right. It's incredible because when it comes to Mangala Shikana, when it comes to coroners, when it comes to all that type of thing, it seems like they're all fucking in on it.
Well, there was a lovely coroner handling it originally, and she completely believed me. I said to her, something's absolutely not right here. Something's very, very wrong, because I got my mother safely away, but then my sister had felt sorry for Dad, you know, all the trauma bonding. So she had come home to look after him, and within months she was dead. You know, like I said, within 10 days of Mum and her agreeing to get DNA tests done to see if they had been, if it had been topped at birth. And there was much more history to this. Like, you know, my mum would say that she knew it wasn't her child, and it wasn't postpartum depression, because she knew the minute they brought the wrong baby back to her, it wasn't her child. And you know, there was rejection and trauma all through my sister's life. There was also abuse all through her life. And then we were also we were always put in convents. There's huge memory blocks. Like, my sister doesn't remember a whole term at a boarding school convent in Worcester in England.
Nice.
You know, you know, if we sat, if my sister and I and my mum, which we had started to do before Fiona was killed, in my opinion, we'd sit and discuss the same chapter of our lives, and we'd look at each other like mad people, because according to the level of drugging that had been going on, two of us would know one thing as a fact, and the other one would just look completely dumbfounded. Like, when we talked to Fiona and said, do you remember going to boarding school in Worcester? You know, Auntie Mary organised it for you. And I never did. I did not. I never did. And yet you could produce the paperwork to prove that she did.
Right.
But,
and your own memories as well, knowing that.
Well, and like I would say to her, don't you remember you came home, and a vivid memory she had, to me it looked like blood in her school uniform. And again, this is the thing, so you get told as a child what the explanation is, and it's not until you're an adult you think that doesn't make sense. So it looked like she had blood, and she said, oh, it was beetroot. I didn't like my beetroot at school dinner, and I put it in my pocket, which is possible. There's lots of things that are possible, but there's such a propensity of things. You know, we would get put in gifted child programs. We would get observed. Like, my older sister was a radio DJ in Gibraltar, aged 9.
Okay.
She would do a 2-hour show every Sunday on military radio. And Donovan, the singer, came and had his 21st birthday party on the Rock of Gibraltar in the caves. Okay. And no journalists were allowed. There were all these celebrities flew to Gibraltar for Donovan's 21st. But my 9-year-old sister was taken to the party.
Okay.
And it was painted that, oh, isn't that lovely? He wouldn't let any journalist come, but he's let this little DJ come. She's the only, you know, journalist, but she has no memory of it.
Right.
She had,
it's all mellow yellow, is it?
She absolutely has. This is what I'm saying. There's different. The power would have been if we would sit down and try and write our memories, because each of us had different parts of the puzzle. And for a while, my mother was starting to disclose. But when she knew that I was starting to join some serious dots, and I brought a researcher over from England, and I found where the funding was coming for some of the projects, and I found evidence, and I started to network with other survivors, my mum got scared and the family got scared. and the family cut her off from me. They just said, don't talk to Angela, it's not, you know.
Well, I'd be worried about you, Angela, you know, your life being in danger with what happened to your sister.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, I have had assassination attempts on my life, because after the sort of intense trauma for the first 8 years, including, you know, I have other horrible graphic memories I haven't gone into, but, you know, horrendous sexual abuse and medical abuse and what I now know to be drugging.
Yeah.
But after the trauma, we were very highly educated, and then we were strategically placed in positions of power and influence, you know. So I found myself, you know, working, you know, I found myself babysitting for a niece of the Astors, you know, the Right Honourable John Jolliffe and his wife, and then I found myself ghostwriting for another MKUltra Princess Honey Hohenlohe in Marbella, living at her house with some Hohenlohe Austrian royals, and I found myself social secretary for Lord and Lady Gillan Foley. I found myself working in the CIA bank, BCCI, you know. I found myself governors for Saudi royals related to Adnan Khashoggi. So everywhere I've been placed before I started to wake up seemed like an assignment, you know. And there were assassination attempts, absolutely. Once I felt like if my father had his shotgun in his hand, he would have shot me dead. And I had recorded a death threat from him when I was helping my mother to escape living with him. He took me for a drive, and when I drove him, but I recorded him, and he was saying, if you take my wife from me, I won't be responsible for what happens to you, and I won't be held responsible for anything that happens to you, and I'm warning you. You know, he was making death threats. But another time I took her away and was trying to get her the proper help, and she was starting to realize that, you know, something was not right. If he'd have had his shotgun in his hand, he would have killed myself probably, and then my mother, you know, murder-suicide. He did try that. He held us hostage once. He held us hostage once as children, my mother and the 5 children. It was a siege, and he had the shotgun loaded, and he was going to kill each of us children in front of mum, and then her, and then himself. And by some act of God, the parish priest called to the house, and my mother managed to escape. She left us 5 children with my father, like a lunatic. But she said to the priest, oh yes, you go and talk to him. I just have to get a message from a neighbour. And she ran to a neighbour's house and said, you know, quick, Nico was going to shoot us all. But in America, it was more sinister. I think it was connected to Werner Erhard and the cults I was involved with, a bit like Scientology. But yeah, I had sabotage done to my car, where on one occasion a wheel came off, and I was doing 80 miles an hour on the freeway outside San Francisco, and just a miracle saved me, and I had my daughter by then. And then when I went to the garage, she said, this is criminal sabotage. These wheel nuts have been sawed off or something. And then I think about a month later, I thought he was just being a bit dramatic. He said, you should go to the police, and I didn't. And then about a month later, I was driving, and then the brakes failed and the steering failed, and I couldn't turn off the freeway. And I was just came over the Golden Gate Bridge, and I was driving, and this was near the Presidio. I didn't know all that stuff was going on with the McMartin preschools and Michael Akito and all that stuff. But I was living in Sausalito, and I managed to go to the next exit on the motorway, and I managed to go down the gears and use the handbrake to stop the car safely.
Well done you.
I know. I had a boyfriend that taught me to drive, and he went on to be he's a Formula One vintage driver now. So he taught me to drive superbly. But so I was a damn good driver, and I managed to stop the car safely with no brakes, with the gear. And again, I was told that the brake pipes or lines had been cut, or it was an assassination attempt. But if you're dissociative and you're living in a permanent state of dissociation, and I was having fun as well. I mean, my life was pretty exciting and glamorous, even though I was being moved around like a pawn. But you don't join the dots. You just
so when was that light bulb moment, or did it come over a period of time?
It's over a period of time. It's over a period of time. I think when my niece went to court over abuse by an ex-brother-in-law. She went to court in Trim, and then the ex-brother-in-law had confessed, and even with confessing, the judge broke the law, and the judge gave him a 6-year sentence because he'd confessed to sexually abusing a child, but he suspended it. He suspended the entire sentence because he said, "Oh, I think it was just a one-off. I don't think it was any danger of it happening again."
Just a one-off. Who was that judge? Can you name him?
I can't remember his name, but he then said, "I don't see any need to go on the sex register," because a priest from Virginia gave him a character reference, and the family were, I don't know if it was out of shame or out of insanity, the family sided with the paedophile, even though he had confessed to sexually abusing my 13-year-old.
This was in Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Angela, sorry to interrupt you, but it's a mentality here. I mean, there's parishes that have had arrests of paedophile priests, and they have been convicted and have gone to prison. And yet the congregation send him cakes and money and look after him. And when he comes out, he's back in the pulpit.
Yeah, well, the priest gave a reference to this paedophile, and my family sided with him and said that my niece must have done something to seduce him, or she must have been sexually.
She must have looked pretty,
or whatever. Do you know? So that. I made a DVD around that time because we didn't discover until last year that it was illegal. The judge didn't have a right not to put him on the sex offenders register. There was a confession on videotape. He was found guilty. The judge had no right to skip over the part of putting him on the sex offenders register. And, if my niece wasn't still suffering from the results of being from the same very dysfunctional family and having had horrific abuse in her life too, she should sue that judge because, it was outrageous. She's never had any apologies. She got rejected by the family. And so, I don't know, it was kind of an awakening time around there. And then I stumbled upon the Bases interviews of Miles Johnston's work.
Miles, he's been on the show a few times.
Yeah, I stumbled upon like Max Spears and James Casbolt, and then Kathy Morgan. And then Kathy Morgan and I connected because we've both been in the convent system in Bath.
Okay.
In England. And she was much further ahead with her research than me. And she wanted to meet up with me and hear my testimony because it completely corroborated hers. I mean, she was a twin, and she was in horrific experiments where one twin was sexually abused and the other wasn't. And just the most insane, horrific.
It just goes to show who's in charge of all this. I mean, who is actually orchestrating and saying that this type of shit is okay?
Yeah, it's all institutes. It's all is connected with all the eugenicists and the Huxley, Aldous Huxley and Juliet Huxley and William Sargent's work and the Rothschild money and Carnegie. If you look at all the Illuminati families, the funding was all coming from them. If you bring it into modern day terms, they're looking at now Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates.
And do you remember Dr. Kinsey?
Yeah, oh my God, yes. That's the kind of thing that was going on. And I believe that's the kind of thing that my mother and my sisters and I were signed up for from pre-birth.
Because that's what it reminds me of. Everything that you said. I did a show ages ago. I was traumatized after the show.
I'm sorry if this is triggering for anybody. You maybe should have given out a warning before. Maybe you could when you go live.
Yes, maybe so.
Yeah.
It is important to know, but it is also to know that people should be triggered to remember these things, and we need to bring this system down. And you've given us over an hour of a horrendous life story of your parents.
And I've only touched the surface of things. You know,
well, if you want to carry on with that, fine. But I'd really love for people to know about your campaigning and how that started.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm still uncovering my story and my history. I'm still trying to. I don't know if I'll ever get all my memories back because of drugging and hypnotism and trauma and splitting and so on. I'd like to get them back fully, but I've had cellular memories of rituals and I've vomited for 40 minutes straight, and I just feel like it's part of my mind that belongs to me, and if I can face all of it, and I think I've got a better chance of healing. But I started to get active. I don't know, I've always had a compassion for okay, guys, so that's another chunk of my story. And then I go on, I'll do the next clip on campaigning and why I work to help children. Sorry, it's like I feel anxious when I go that deep in a testimony, and I get idiots like Shiva Burton or trolls like saying, "Oh, you're a liar," and "Oh, you said your mother was evacuated in World War I," and I get anxious. But actually, even listening back, it's so powerful because it takes me to the next level. Like, I'm ready to do a video about trafficking. I'm ready to talk about places we were taken and then drugged, So it just gives you the courage, gives me the courage to go deeper. And something that makes me horrendously, that I have to press through, makes me sad, is the orchestrated opposition to this kind of truth coming out. So I think I said this in the first video, I went to join something from a certain phone, the phone that was confiscated in the raid on my house in August 2018. And this was given back to me in January 2019, long before any inquiry. The inquiry still hasn't been brought to a conclusion. But when I finished with this website, it sent me a message and it said, your IP address has been flagged for fraud and something else. And I suddenly realized that this phone, given back to me by Jerry Goldrick of Kells Barracks, they flagged it. So they gave it back to me supposedly innocently, but they marked it. And if it was a just world, I would be able to take action about that. I've never been arrested. I've never been charged. I'm not guilty of fraud. But Jerry Goldrick, with the approval of Mark Luby, was able to flag my IP address connected to that phone. And when Brian Harvey got given back his tech, after 2 years or something, he said, oh, there's no way I'm going to use that. There's no way I'm going to trust that they haven't put something on there. I thought he was overreacting. I thought he was being conspiratorial, And John Patterson was so grateful when DC Andy Grimwood gave him back his stuff and apparently hadn't interfered with it. But it's taken me a year and a half to find out that the IP address connected to my phone, which was a Christmas present from my boys, has been flagged. You know, shame on you, Jerry Goldrick. Shame on you. Right, part 3 will be a bit more light-hearted. Well, not really, because it's covering the Hampstead case, but this was another part of my story.